Welcome to Futureproof Business. Smart strategies, real insights, and tools to lead and scale in a fast-changing world. Let's future-proof your success.
Welcome to the Inspire Impact Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Rosenstein. Today I have the honor of interviewing Robert White. Robert, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
It's a delight to be with you, Daniel. I've been looking forward to this.
Me too. I'm very excited to interview you today. Can you share with the audience a little bit about your background, like who you are?
You know, I'm old enough and I've done enough crazy things for that to take way too long. So I'll mention a couple of turning points. I did grow up in abuse and poverty and all those things that would make a good Lifetime movie, I suppose. But I always felt like that there was something special that I was supposed to be doing in the world. I got into radio. I mentioned that in a pre-talk at age 14. At 17, I had the highest rated top 40 show in the state of Wisconsin. And went off to college, had a heart attack, and dropped out after one semester and went to work in the world. And that led me to being 27 years old, broke, divorced, a teenage marriage that I felt very guilty about ending. And with daily chest pain, the heart issue. And a friend of mine went out to California. We were living in Wisconsin and went to one of the early human potential development seminars called Mind Dynamics. And he came back raving about it, told me I have to go. And I went into resistance for about 6 months. And then they actually, because of his enthusiasm and his results, he put together a group in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I lost my big excuse of traveling to California just for this crazy seminar. So I attended. I went there negative and cynical, arms crossed, legs crossed, probably eyes crossed. And 4 days later, my life began to change for the better. And a year in that seminar, they don't talk about money. They don't talk about success. And they just talk about you. And you find out what's in your way of getting what you want in life. And it was an incredible experience for me. So a year later, I had tripled my income in my little sales business. A year after that, it went up 10 times. And I started making more money a month than I had ever made in a year. But also my relationships got better. It was just in every area. And I started seeing what was possible for me. That led to my promoting Mind Dynamics as a graduate, not for money. And I ended up putting about 400 people in training over a couple of years. And one day the founder and chairman of that as a business called me out of nowhere. I didn't even know his name, and said, would I come out and meet with him in California? And he sent me a first class ticket. I had never traveled first class. I went out to California, and 10 days later, I was president of Mind Dynamics. So that's the beginning of my many years now in the human potential movement business and training and coaching. I spent 4 years there. The ownership changed, which didn't work for me. I started my own company called LifeSpring. And after only 6 months, I sold my own company because it didn't work for me. And that's kind of a story maybe for a different podcast. And in the meantime, I had set up 7 foreign subsidiaries for Mind Dynamics. It was my primary job the last 2 years there. And the only country I said no to was Japan. It was the craziest culture that I had ever experienced. The language was backwards from the Roman languages. And the overhead was extremely high because we take a lot of space to do our trainings. And space is at a premium in Japan. So I said no. And anybody I think now that knows the Japanese and knows their business practices is not surprised to find out they didn't just go away with my no. They reached out about monthly for 2 years. And then when I sold LifeSpring, I'd put every penny I had into it. So now I'm broke. I've got a family to support. I've got a mortgage, all these practical things. I'm kind of unemployable. And so I got a new offer from Japan. Come for 90 days only and set up a program, and we'll pay you for 1 year. So I thought that sounds pretty good. And I went off to Tokyo. And my first stay there was 12 years. And we built a training company in Asia that had 15 training centers, 7 in Japan, 2 in Taiwan, 1 in Manila, 1 in Seoul, 1 in Sydney, 1 in Hong Kong, an illegal one at the time in China. And we became the largest training company in Asia and the second largest in the world. So then I semi-retired at 46 and moved to Aspen, Colorado, and built a big house and bought a jet. We did all, skied 80 days a year, and remarried, had 2 birth children, 2 adopted special needs kids. So in a way I was busy, but I wasn't paying attention to my business. And I lost it all. The house, the jet, the 5 cars, and the marriage, the remarriage, second marriage. And I went back to work. And so I've been doing executive team training primarily and coaching owners and entrepreneurs and executives on how to balance success and having a life that includes joy and fulfillment. And I love what I do.
That's an incredible story. I mean, most people, all the people that I interview on the podcast, they just tell me that they're a coach. They tell me in 2 seconds. That's pretty much their story. Their story is much bigger than a lot of other people I've interviewed, which is fantastic. I love it. I'm very curious. Like when you said when you first took that seminar, that initially was a double or triple your sales income. Like what was the transformation? Like, was there like a particular mindset shift that said, hey, like I'm more deserving, or I'm good enough to be a better in sales? Or can you share what was the happening then that created that, spark that helped you, like you said, 10x your income in a few years?
In the human condition, we learn language, be 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old. We start to learn how to listen and how to express ourselves. But it's gradual. There's not usually a breakthrough moment. And that's certainly been true for me. In the training, that early Mindedemics training, what I received primarily was this. And a lot of work I do through stories, so I'll share this one. I became really clear that I was being my mother, who was an intensely critical, negative, nasty person. And I used my words as weapons, and that caused a lot of people to not want to be around me. And I'm in a sales business where I have to recruit people and sell. Not a good combination. So what happened on the story side of things is, and people will say that all clear up for you as a real result of the training. And the answer is no. What I got was the awareness of how I was getting in the way of what I really wanted. So one of the things that happened, and this might sound a little strange, but it's what happened. Daniel, I started seeing those negative words come out of my mouth and land on people like an explosive charge. I could see the process happening. And so once I had that awareness and understood it, as a result of it, understood how damaging it was. The next thing that happened was I started to stop myself. And it was hilarious, I guess, if somebody was really watching. It was like I captured the words physically in my mouth. And my life got better instantly just by shutting up, in effect. What I learned is I actually had this strength called critical thinking. Unfortunately, I transmitted it to others in a way that there's no way they could receive it except negatively. And it forced the people away from me that I had to have in my life to get what I wanted in my life. So that was the first thing. The second thing shows up in my book. My book's now a bestseller, and even though it took me 20 years to finally write it, I'm proud of it. But I was very nervous when I wrote it because I had done everything behind the scenes in building my company and in living my life. I was not interested in fame. I was interested in accomplishment and respect. But it didn't matter to me if people knew who I was or any of that. And I really knew that writing a book is going public. And I was really nervous about it. So the book was released. I sent copies to people in our industry and people that I respected. And I got a tremendous amount of positive feedback, and people like Ken Blanchard and Jimmy Colano and all these kind of people that are kind of famous in our field. And they bought copies for their family and for their companies, and it was great. And then I started noticing that they would say, "I love your book, Robert, but I'm disappointed in one thing." And of course I would say, "What are you disappointed in?" And they said, "It's not about you. The title of the book is Living an Extraordinary Life." And I assumed the book was about you, and it's not, but I love the book. But I'm disappointed it's not about you. And it's not. It's about our graduates. There's 1,300,000 of them from these companies that I've founded and led. And it's what happens when they confront the material in our seminars. And so it's their stories. And I think that's why it's a bestseller. I think if it was about me, it might be my family and a few friends who would buy it. But it's about them. And the book is not about me. And what I didn't share for years, Daniel, is there's one chapter about me. It doesn't say that in the book. I'll reveal the secret here. The book is, a big section of the book is about the power of our conscious and unconscious beliefs, our belief system, what we believe about life, about money, about marriage, about men, about women, about the environment, about everything. And it's like an underlying programming system within us. And the therapists tell us, the researchers tell us, that our belief system is pretty much in place by the time we're 8 years old. And then we go looking for evidence that we're right about it, unfortunately. Or some big event happens in our life, and that sometimes will shift a belief. And my belief, and the one in the chapter in the book, is titled The Most Dangerous Belief of All, which is, I am not enough. I am not enough. Now, in executive coaching, that comes out as the imposter syndrome. I'm a fake, I'm a fraud, I don't know how I got to this level, that kind of stuff. And I've had clients that dealt with that. But my version of it, I'm not enough. I didn't have enough education. I didn't grow up with a lot of the things that other people did. I'm undisciplined. You name the negative quality, and I could tell you that was true about me. But I was committed to getting away from poverty, away from abuse, away from a limited life, that I kind of crashed through that without dealing with the underlying, I am not enough. So that no matter what I accomplished, it was not enough. And a lot of people, friends of mine, tell this story that it was a big dream to have my own airplane, my own jet. And when I got it, I showed it off and I felt really good about it. It was the accomplishment of a big goal. And 2 weeks later, I was in Mexico on a holiday with the late Mel Simon and his wife. And so Mel and I kind of bonded on this trip. It was on one of these mini cruise lines, where there's only 53 suites. And there were more staff than there were participants on the boat. And you get to go in these little harbors, not the big harbors. So it was great. It was, a luxury trip. It was wonderful. But Mel and I would go for walks in these little Mexican villages and talk around the pool and talk over dinner. And we just became very close. And he's another friend that unfortunately is no longer with us. And so I'm near the last day. He says, "Hey, how are you getting back to Aspen?" And I said, "My airplane's coming." And he said, "That's a waste." He said, "Why don't I just give you a ride back?" So I had an airplane called a Hawker, and it was 8 passengers. It was stand-up. That was always the dispute between my friend John Denver and I. His airplane was a hot rod, but you couldn't stand up in it, and it didn't have a separate toilet. We ragged on each other about that because his plane was a lot faster than mine. A Lear 35 it's like a hot rod among airplanes. Yeah. So I said, "Sure, great." And we got to the airport. It was a Challenger 600. That's a regional jet. It's flown by American Airlines and Air Canada and, all of these of course, the inside of the airplane was not like a regional jet. It was like a deluxe living room with a separate bedroom. It's a big airplane. And I remember sitting on the airplane thinking, oh, this is wonderful. And the next thing that came was, I'm not enough. I don't have a Challenger.
Wow.
So I got to enjoy my plane for about 2 weeks. And I'm exaggerating, of course. But that notion for people that I am not enough, I've found is pretty common. I'm not the only one that has felt that way. And for me, in maybe the last 10 years, 12 years, I can confidently say that I am enough. I'm not perfect. I'm still undisciplined sometimes and struggle with my weight, and I'm late for a podcast with you, Daniel. I know but I'm enough. So that's been a part of my personal journey.
I totally agree with you. I mean, that's been one of my biggest issues my whole life, is feeling I'm not enough, because I've done so many different things, so many different ventures, whether it's trying to make money online or even gigs I deal with friends or comparing yourself to others. It always feels like I'm not enough. I'm not enough. I mean, what advice do you give to people like our listeners on how to overcome that I'm not enough or imposter syndrome? Because as you said, it's so prevalent in our society. I mean, almost everybody I met feels like that.
I think, in my case, the journey is, I've been to more than 50 outside seminars, trainings over the years, partially for me, but more so because I'm in the industry and I want to know what else is going on, what's working, what's not working. And learning from others has always been a big part of my corporate life, my business life. But also that notion, I was so blessed at 27 to find out that 4 days can change your life. I have the opinion from a lot of experiences that the psychology is suspect, slightly, and that 19 out of 20 psychologists are in their profession to get their own product wholesale. They're a little crazy, and in working on themselves, they learn how to work with us. 1 out of 20 can save your life, and I've been blessed, especially with my adopted children, to have met one of those 1 out of 20 people. But that plugging myself into these different experiences, outdoor experiences, learning some breath work, getting feedback when I didn't want to hear it in some of these group sessions, all of those things that upset the normal life. We all have events in our childhood that have an impact on us the rest of our life. The question is whether we're conscious of them, become aware of them, and that we can start to adjust them. And I feel so blessed that I've been gifted with that interest. You have to have it. A therapist that did such a good job with my adopted son, Levi, and it's an exaggeration maybe, but maybe not. This guy, Dr. Jim Janelle, saved my son's life. He was headed for big trouble and failure in life, and Jim Janelle made a really positive difference. And one of the good things about COVID is I had just come back from 6 years in China, just before COVID hit. And now I'm out of business because everything I do is face-to-face. And there was not much to do, and restaurants weren't open, and, all of those kinds of things. And I drove up to Estes Park, Colorado. That's an entry town for the Rocky Mountain National Park. It's a stunningly beautiful place. And I went up when I couldn't do anything else and spent a whole day with him. He's retired now. And I sat at the feet of a master. And, that sounds a little pretentious, but it was true. And I asked him about the difference between the 19 and the 1. And of course, I made up those numbers, but, what is it that makes a good therapist? And he had a long answer, and I'll give you the short version, one word: readiness. When people are ready, And you see this in dramatic form with people who have an addiction to drugs or alcohol or something. When they're ready, they'll find help. When an executive is consistently losing key people, it ain't about the people. You can't change the other people. You can only work on you. So when is the executive going to take a deep breath and go, I need to do a little work on me and on how I interact with my team and how my team interacts with me? What expectations do I put out there? And so that's the answer to the question. Way too long of an answer, but Daniel, it's when the key thing is when they're ready, there are plenty of resources out there to help them. There are some great coaches. There's some great training programs available, great experiences. And I just buy my book at the beginning. My daughter, by the way, says, you think you're such a big deal. You're just a book salesman. Now,
What inspired you to write the book in the first place?
first of all, people said for 20 years, as I was building this business in Asia, you need to write a book about this. And I had a bunch of excuses, very carefully rehearsed, I assure you. And the biggest one being that I said, we do experiential training. You can't put that in a book. What I found out is when people are really ready, a book can be an experience. So I was wrong all those years. Really, I was just afraid to go out in public and share what I knew personally. I mean, I had 240 full-time people, another 60 contract trainers. They did the work. They interacted with people. I was behind the scenes, to some degree hiding, because I'm not enough, right? That's what not enough people do. We hide behind others. And but what did it for me was we had an anniversary program in Hong Kong. The staff invited me to come and speak. One of my rare opportunities to actually be in front of people. And it's a classic in our industry. I'm not the only one to kind of complain about this. They asked me to come and speak. I said, what do you want me to talk about? They said, our purpose and our vision, our values. I said, okay, how much time do I have? 20 minutes. This is 20 minutes through an interpreter. So it's really about 12 minutes. And I want to talk about all of that purpose, vision, value stuff. And I realized that earlier in my career in the sales business, that I saw a president of a company that I learned later, it was exactly the same interaction. People wanted to come and have him speak, but don't take too much time. We've got other agenda to accomplish. And what he offered during his talk was he said, look, I have this limited time, but if you'd like to stay late, I'll show up here down on the floor. This was an audience of about 4,000 people at that time. And he said, I'll talk to you. I'd like to meet you. I stood in line for an hour and a half to meet him, just to shake his hand and thank him for the contribution he had made to my life. It was meaningful to me. It was like meeting a star in a way, a business star, right? And so I thought, I'll do that. So I told the people that, in my case, 2,800 people in Hong Kong at the Grand Hyatt, I have limited time, but if you'd like to meet, I'll stay as long as you'd like to stay. And I learned several things from that. First thing was don't wear patent leather shoes, formal shoes, and stand for 2.5 hours. The second thing was it's Asia. Everybody had to take a picture. Flash at that time. I mean, I literally started losing my sight. It took me several days to recover my feet and my eyes. But the third thing was the way our people introduce themselves is always the same. I attended your basic seminar on this date. I attended the advanced seminar at this date. And then the third program, the leadership program. That's how they introduce themselves. It's like they're bona fides, right? And then a number of them said, and I attended the Stephen Covey leadership program. Okay, now they've listed their curriculum to me in our program, but also that they did the Covey program. So I'm trying to stay present. That president that I was talking about so many years before, when I was 26 or so, And the other person that I noticed this is about presence was Bill Clinton. When I met Bill Clinton in a crowded room, he made me feel like I was the only person on the planet in a crowded room. Now that's magic, right? That's being really present. That guy all those years earlier had done that with me, even though he had all these, more than 1,000 people in line. He made me feel like I was the only person that ever occurred to him to talk to. So that's what I wanted to do with my deal. And I started noticing this Stephen Covey leadership program reference. So to keep myself present, I started saying, was that valuable for you? And they all said no. So then I started saying, because again, I'm getting person after person, light bulb flash, sore feet. And so I started saying, why did you go? And they said, because I read his book. So the first reason that I wrote the book is kind of the cumulative effect of all those people saying I should have. And the second thing was I felt ashamed that I hadn't read the book because it would help my business. And so that's how it happened. I spent about a year, about 10 months, getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and writing for 2 hours. And so that's living an extraordinary life. And we interviewed lots of graduates and got stories from all over the world. And it's worked out well. It's a bestseller. It's introduced a lot of people to our work. It's been of value. I get a lot of complimentary connections from it. And I'm proud of it. And I'm pleased that it's helped so many people.
So you mentioned before, like you spent many years living in Asia, like Japan, Hong Kong, China. How did that shape your leadership and global perspective living in Asia for all those years?
I attended the Peter Drucker seminar years ago, and he is credited, somewhat falsely credited, with the statement that culture eats strategy for breakfast. The culture of an organization is more important than your strategy, your product, all of that stuff. And that's what I pay a lot of attention to. That's what I've learned. And nothing will do that more than being in a foreign culture. There was a book and a movie years ago, black and white movie, called The Ugly American. If you go abroad, you find out about the ugly American. People love America. They don't like us quite a few of them don't like us very much. There's a stereotype of our cultural insensitivity. And so you learn to be more careful with how you dress, with how you speak, with how you show up with people. And I think that was a big thing. Our trainings in Asia have the same content, but it is arranged radically differently. Because in America, what you have to do, if you're leading one of these, it's kind of a confrontational program where people have to look in the mirror and see what's working and not working in their lives. That's true in the public side of our trainings, but also on corporate sides, to get feedback, to find out how you're really showing up in the world and with other people. In America, when you do that kind of seminar, the first 2 to 3 hours is an attempt to get control of the room. Because when you start telling the truth, some people handle their nervousness or their arrogance or their narcissism or whatever by challenging the trainer. And it kind of brings the training to a halt. I've talked to a lot of people over the years, Daniel, and a lot of people get this about their own behavior or other people's behavior, that the first couple of hours or in some cases 3 days, 4 days, 5 days of the training is war between the trainer and the participants. Even though they paid for it, chose to be there is still some kind of a frustration for them that they put out by trying to grab control of the room, especially when you start asking them to do uncomfortable behaviors, even those behaviors that we have proven really help people make progress in their life, and they'll resist them like crazy, even though they paid for it, even though they chose to be there, even though they've heard from their sponsor, whoever enrolled them in the training. And even though we say it in writing, you're going to be asked to do some uncomfortable things. And they still fight you. In Asia, it's just the opposite. They're so used to being spoken to, not engaged with. Their professors are like gods. Their whole educational systems everywhere in Asia is tightly controlled classrooms. And you know the difference between that and America. It's open season on the teacher, right? Either directly or passively. That passive stuff is the toughest thing to handle. But so we had to change the beginning of our training in Asia to have more engagement on the front end, because the respect is automatic. The respect for the trainer. They're going to do what they're told, but that doesn't mean they will engage and really think and examine themselves. So it's the same training, but it's done slightly differently. And also, Western cultures are guilt-based, and that's primarily due to Judeo-Christian teachings, that we're sensitive to feeling guilty about things, and we bury our guilt. In Asia, they are shame-based. Having other people know about your missteps is the worst thing that can happen in Asia. So a lot of things that we do around clearing guilt and letting it go have to be done slightly different with shame. So I don't want to get too technical, but it's those kinds of things.
Very interesting. As you think, I really don't travel, so it's very interesting you say these things, because things I would have never even thought about, I take for granted, It's like, in terms of thinking the way things are the way they are, but I realize that's just our culture, the way things are. I didn't think, Japan, like, your respect is automatic. I'm used to people saying that. This isn't true. And I'm always thinking about already being defensive sometimes, because I already know that a lot of times when I ever do say something, that people are going to object and put up resistance, say, this or that.
Yeah. Look, I've often said to people that, one of my companies, the holding company, was ARC International, ARC, which is an acronym for awareness, responsibility, and communication. And I've often said to people that if you could become like one of the masters at awareness, my former wife called it developing a higher state of noticing what's going on within you and the people around you and your environment as a whole and your culture. If you can develop a high level of awareness, you don't need our trainings. That's an exaggeration. And it's also an excuse for some people, I think. But the power of really developing that higher state of noticing will take you a long way. It's something I highly recommend to others, that instead of operating from that, especially the unconscious parts of your belief system, that you become so aware of yourself and that you are okay and that you can notice these things, that you can learn from your environment, from other people. And, like, I want you to know that living in Aspen, Colorado is like living in a foreign culture, because those people have made so much money. Just the way they think is so differently. I loved it, but I noticed that it was different. These are some very highly successful people, very adventurous people. They ski, they hike, fish, jump off mountains with a parachute. It's craziness. I've often said to people that Aspen's a very difficult place to work. And one of the things I had to do when I went back to work was, unfortunately, I had to leave my friends in Aspen. But in Aspen, there's only 3 conversations. You meet people on the street. It's a village. Off season, it's only 8,500 people. During the season, summer and winter, it's 40 to 50,000. But, you run into friends. You go to town. I was a little bit outside of town. And you go to town, it's like visiting all your old friends. You see them in one day. And the conversation is, number one, it's sport. How many days did you ski this year? How fast can you climb the Mute Trail? Have you hiked the Rio Grande Trail recently? Stuff like that. The second conversation is about travel. We're going to Tuscany for a cooking class. Would you like to go? We're putting a group together. And then the third piece is charity. I bought a table at your event last year. You got to buy a table at my event this year, our fundraising event. Any other conversation is not allowed. So if you're doing business, you have to hide it. And some people do, by the way. It's a cultural thing, and you can learn from it if you just open up your ability to notice and change and realize all of life is choices. And sometimes you make good ones and sometimes not so good. But what did you learn from that? What did you notice? So that, and living in a foreign culture like Tokyo or Hong Kong or Guangzhou and traveling to Manila and Seoul and Sydney. I mean, they kind of speak English in Australia. I don't know if you've heard of this.
Kind of speak,
But it's
I think pretty well. I actually interviewed some people who live in Australia. I love Australia.
it is a different culture. It's a radically different culture. And again, an opportunity to learn about you and how you interact with them and how you adjust to it. So it's a good question. Thank you.
I wanted to ask you, when I was visiting your website before the show, I noticed like in your client testimonial section, you have a testimonial that says, gave me a clear sense of what my life is about. My seminar experience gave me a clear sense of what my life is about, what's possible, what an incredible gift. And that testimonial is written by the late John Denver, the singer-songwriter. That is actually, are you allowed to share what was it like working with him? I know we kind of chatted a little bit before the podcast began. In my opinion, he was absolutely amazing. I know a lot of people do. Obviously, he was extremely famous. What did he say he got out of the seminar? What did he go for? Was this before he became famous? He took the seminar or afterwards, or?
I guess you would say after. We were using some of John Denver's music in our trainings. He has a song called What One Man Can Do. That's like what one man or what one woman can do is kind of a theme of our training approach. He wrote it for the late Buckminster Fuller, who had a big influence on his life and on mine, by the way. And so we used that song in the training. He has a song called I Want to Live. That's an incredibly moving, powerful, inspirational song. And we used that in his training, a couple of others. And, he's more famous for Country Roads and Annie's Song and the big hits, Perhaps Love, a beautiful song. And we're using it illegally back in the day when they really were strict on that. You couldn't use music in public unless you paid for it. We were not paying for it, I admit. And we use a lot of other people's songs. Billy Joel has a song called Honesty. Pretty good theme song for our work, is being more honest. And then I published the first published book that I did is I wrote the essays for a photographic book called One World, One People. And when I did it, I realized that we were mirroring a lot of what John sings about. And we're using his stuff in our trainings. So I sent a copy of the book to him. It's a coffee table book, won a lot of awards. It's the big, multicolored, beautiful book. And I didn't hear anything back, but if you send a gift to somebody, you're not supposed to expect a reply. And I found out later, at that time, he was receiving 7,000 pieces of mail a month. He wasn't responding to anything.
Oh, sure.
Anyway, that's chapter 1. We're using his music illegally. Chapter 2 is I come back to the U.S. And I actually came to Denver, Colorado originally, a suburb of Denver. And one of our staff members came to me and said, I'm fully engaged in this nonprofit set up by John Denver called WindStar, committed to a sustainable future of the environment. And the organization is a mess. Would you please help? And Daniel, it felt to me like it was I don't know if I would say a message from God, but here's this guy that I admire greatly and who's made a huge contribution to people through our trainings, through the use of his music in our trainings. And here's a chance for me to give back. So I went to a board, it ended up arranged for me to go to a board meeting of WinStar in Aspen. And it was 4 hours long, 3.5 hours in. John turned to me. I'd met him, shook hands, said hi, thanks for the invitation. And then I just listened for 3.5 hours. He said, do you have any coaching on our meeting? And, it was one of those moments where I'm clever enough verbally to get out of it, to escape, not tell the truth, be polite, But I just thought, no, that's not why God sent me here. So I said, you've spent 3.5 hours debating whether or not to have chickens on your property in Old Snowmass. That's not the proper role of a board of directors. And, you can, in any organization, if you say something that's a little controversial, and I just told them that their meeting was a complete failure, if the room goes silent and everybody looks at the boss, that is not a good sign. And that's what happened. So they're all looking at John, including me, to see how he would react. And he burst into laughter. And he said, we did that, didn't we? And he said, we do that all the time. I said, your complaint that brought me here is that the organization is not working for you. It's not effective. And you may have just learned what causes that. You spent 3.5 hours on something no board of directors should ever be talking about. And everybody was passionate and engaged in something that was completely wrong. And then he invited me to his home. And in his library, there was a grand piano and a lot of books on the shelves. Only one book was out, and it was my book. One people. And he didn't know that. He didn't know that was me. It was just, he's a photographer. He loved the pictures. He loved the theme, one world, one people. So that was the only book he had out on top of his piano. And we just became friends. And then we did training for John and the staff and board of WinStar, which was interesting. And out of that, he wrote 2 songs for us, one of which is I'm very proud of. And we became personal friends. We vacationed together. We traveled together presenting a program called Higher Ground, which was based on the teachings of Buckminster Fuller, and where he would do a concert, his business one night. And then the next night we would do this 4-hour program together, about half by me, half by him. And, you end up talking late into the night. You're traveling together, we alternated airplanes and teased each other about that. And we just became very close friends. We got divorced together. We both went through savage divorces for 3 years together. So I miss him and I admire him greatly. Maybe more today than I did then, interestingly, and what I learned from him about how to live an extraordinary life. Because he did. I mean, he had, in the 70s, his former manager, Hal Thaw, said this, and I think it's true. He said in the 40s, it was Frank Sinatra was the biggest. And in the 50s, it was Elvis Presley. And in the 60s, it was the Beatles. But in the 70s, it was John Denver. He sold 120 million, 130 million albums. He appeared before thousands. He sang for the Pope. He sang for 3 presidents. He was big. And he was always rejected by the coastal elite. He was the country boy. They called him granola man, stuff like that. But people loved him and learned from him, including me. He made a big difference in my life.
And you had so many amazing experiences. You're really so lucky. I mean, a lot of people haven't had even close to all the experiences, being able to live in different countries and to learn from so many people and meet them and even become friends with a celebrity, a major celebrity like John Denver. I mean, you must have a lot of gratitude for all the things that, you did experience in life.
Look, I've been blessed, kind of, this is my self-description, stumbling through life. But I think if I was trying to be complimentary of me, I would say when I notice something, an opportunity or an issue or a problem, I act on it. Sometimes appropriately, sometimes not, but I act. And that's been a big thing for me. And I've made so many mistakes, Daniel. I just recently, somebody was a good friend of many years, was teasing me about how I was less involved in politics. But I've been in and out of involvement with politics. But one of the things that happened for me was I had the opportunity to go to the Oval Office when President Reagan was president and receive an award from him personally. And my wife and I, and by the way, for women, this is an excuse for additional pearls, other jewelry, new dress, hair, makeup, the whole thing. For me, wear a nice suit, I'm okay. But when we went there, we were given a private tour of the White House. We were given the opportunity to stay in the Lincoln bedroom the night before, but it didn't work out for us, so we didn't do that. But we saw it, it's very cool to think this is where Abraham Lincoln slept. Like, really, it's the Lincoln bedroom. And you get to see the dish collection and all this stuff, the kitchens, the private quarters. We were very blessed. And then they sat us down in an anteroom and impressed me on how President Reagan really has a tight schedule today. And it's 7 minutes and you're in and you're out. He'll present the award, we'll take a picture, and you're out. So I'm in there, and I have to admit, I'm intimidated. I'm nervous. And I'm thinking 7 minutes, 7 minutes. So he greets us. He's very gracious, gives me this award. We take a picture. And then I'm thinking, I got to get out of here. It's 7 minutes. And he says, wait. And I'm literally turning for the door. And he's, wait. And he said, I have a special present for you. And he goes to a desk. And again, he was one of those politicians that makes you feel like you're the only person in the room. So it's all, I have this special gift just for you. He's probably given that same gift to 100 people, but he sells that. And he hands me this beautiful little blue box. And on the surface, stamped in gold, is the presidential seal. And I'm blown away just by the box. And then, so thank you very much, Mr. President. I think 7 minutes, get out of here. And he says, no, open your gift. So I open it, and it's the presidential seal on cufflinks and a tie bar in cloisonne, that French jewelry methodology that's so beautiful. And it's just stunningly beautiful. And the next words out of my mouth, Daniel, were I don't wear tie bars. And my former wife was, when I met her, she was a physical education teacher in the largest high school in Wisconsin, Menominee Falls High. Had been named Teacher of the Year the previous year. She was so fit. She worked out 6 days a week for the entire 17 years of our marriage. Incredibly fit. Just lovely, classy, wonderful in a group where I'm not so comfortable in groups. I said, I don't wear tie bars. And she elbowed me in the ribs and cracked a rib. She was upset. And so I've had these crazy experiences like that with John Denver, I've met 3 presidents, 2 kings, and an emperor. I've just been really blessed and kind of wandered. I never tried any of it. I didn't try to create any of that. It just happened in the process of living the life that I wanted to live and make the contribution that I think I'm capable of. So.
That's wonderful. Kind of pivot a little bit. When I was perusing your website earlier, you mentioned that leadership isn't about giving orders anymore. So in your opinion, what is modern leadership really about?
One of the things I've done on the charity side of things, I support an organization in Sri Lanka called Sarvodaya. It's a community development organization, second biggest employer in all of Sri Lanka. And they have 17,000 employees. It's big. It does what a lot of our government does, but it's not a government. It's a nonprofit. So being a supporter means you get treated very well if you go there. And so I went there many times to open, our thing was building preschools and community centers in the villages. And so we're in one of the villages and we go to the town where supposedly the Buddha sat under the bo tree. But outside that town it's a little bit like Ayers Rock in Australia, like in the middle of a plain. Here in Colorado, there's a buildup to the Rocky Mountains, foothills, the lower mountains and the higher mountains. This rock is like Ayers Rock. It just stands out in the middle of a beautiful green plain, and it's this big red rock, huge. And the story, we climbed it. It's a tourist thing to do. So we climbed it, and there's a trail and people selling you stuff all the way along the trail. And then you get up to the top and you see this amazing village, or the ruins of an amazing village, carved into the rock were the foundations for all these buildings, and just amazing. And then you learn the story that the guy that created that village up there and his army up there was one of two sons of the king of Sri Lanka years before. And this guy killed his father. He killed the king. And then there was a revolt against him, and he escaped with his army and to the top of this rock. And after several years there, he decided that he was going to, his brother became king, the two boys. And he decided he was going to march back to the capital and assassinate his brother and become the king of Sri Lanka. So he puts his army together. They climb down from the rock. They march off across the plain. And he turns around one moment and realizes the army is not following him. And he was killed, and that was the end of that story. That's the opposite of leadership. He had been a lousy king up on that rock. Well, he got there by killing his father. That's a pretty bad start. But the point is that today in leadership, in the past, you could get away with being dictatorial. Not today. You're going to be judged by your followers, by whether or not you can inspire them to organized action and to creating results. And it's balancing between the need to be very result-oriented, always driven for results, but simultaneously to be a human being. And that's what produces joy and satisfaction and fulfillment in the leader, but also in the followers. And so that's what we work on with leadership teams, is how can you produce spectacular, extraordinary results and do it through building a culture that's bulletproof, that honors the humanity of all people. And that works for everyone.
So you've mentored leaders at over 1,200,000 experiential trainings. What patterns have you noticed that lead to extraordinary results?
It's those three things that were in our company name. Years ago, there was a TV commercial by a guy named Victor Kiam, where he said that he had tried Remington electric shavers and they were so good he bought the company, right? And so that's what Remington became known for, was a comfortable shave. Our company, Awareness, was ARC, awareness, responsibility, and communication. That if you can develop a higher level of awareness, you can spread the idea of personal responsibility as opposed to victimhood. And then if you can become a master in communicating, in all forms of communication, which include listening, which includes writing, which includes art, which includes speaking, of course. And that's our training. You don't have to go to our training to get that if you could really get it. However, many of us are carrying around stuff from the past: blame, shame, regret, guilt, and even past success. And that those things can become a burden and not allowing you to really experience your authentic self and to lead from there. It's more, and that's a lot of, I've learned that in Asia, it's a lot more about your being, your state of being, your consciousness, than it is about your doing. Americans are generally fantastic doers. You know, we go into action, we work hard, we can do things. Shifting your point of view, your perspective, the whole thing about transformative training, experiential training, is to have you get a new perspective on the people and the things and the company and the markets, to the point where you're noticing at a much, much higher level.
Now, you feel like you've had a wide variety of different experiences in the business world. Some were, extremely successful, but that always wasn't the case. You've also experienced sometimes some failure. I mean, there was a time that, you had to shut down 15 different offices and lay off a bunch of people. What did you learn from that, experience that, when things didn't work out?
I choose a word. It's a common thing among people like me, right, that teach. I choose a word to focus on each year. And my word this year is resilience. And I think that with the pace of change for everyone, and I've certainly experienced a lot of changes, is, can you pick yourself up off the floor? Can you manage in chaos? I think we have a pretty chaotic environment right now in the West, maybe worldwide. And so how can you keep your center, which is kind of new age talk, but it's very powerful. How can you keep your authentic self whole, complete, and capable of meeting the challenges of change? The way that anything worked in business 10 years ago is not working today. You better be a constant learner and a learner around a result orientation, not an academic learner, even though research and academia are a contributor. But the magic that creates great workplaces is not explainable in a book. It comes from the leadership's state of being and being able to attract people, like-minded people around you.
So now that you've been teaching for all these years, how do you want to be remembered by? What legacy are you trying to build?
That a kid from the wrong side of the tracks, a product of poverty and abuse, figured out that the way to win in life is to contribute. And I'd like to be remembered for contribution that made a difference.
And you have, you contribute to so many, thousands of people, not just here in the United States, around the world. I mean, that's really fantastic. I mean, it's really amazing in my point of view. I mean, so when people they become selfish or self-absorbed and, they can't even manage their own life or make any contribution to anybody else's. You decide to not be that way, and decide to help others. So thank you for all of that. For big audiences that are, listening to this conversation today, if they have questions or they're interested in work with you, how can they get in touch with you?
My website's the best way, extraordinarypeople.com. Of course, I'm on LinkedIn and all those social things, but the best way is to reach out. I encourage you to register for my weekly e-zine. It takes 1 minute a week to read. Sometimes it's quite valuable. I've had a lot of people tell me that it is. And anytime you respond to that email, I'm the one that reads it and answers personally. I treasure that. I've done it for 17 years now and really enjoy those interactions. It also, if we're going to do something together, it all starts with relationship. The thing that you asked at the early of this, how did I create this life? One of the results that I am proud of is I've been there and I've done that. I've made the mistakes that hopefully I could help other people not make. And I've grabbed the gold ring. I've also succeeded wildly at times. That's what I bring to a relationship. But, call me, write me, send smoke signals. I'm continuing to travel to Asia. I spend a couple of weeks there every 3 months and treasure my connections and ability to contribute there. But I'm here most of the time, and I love getting those phone calls.
Fantastic. Robert, if you can give our audience one extraordinary minute of advice right now, what would that be?
Everything is a choice. Everything's a choice. And it doesn't mean you made the best choice. Sometimes it's the wrong choice. But if you learn from either one, the ones that work out and the ones that don't, but it's always a fresh choice. And that hanging out in the past, that guilt, shame, blame, all of those heavy memories, or even the good old days, often get in the way of choosing, that you're stuck in an old person at an older time. So just remember, it's always about choice.
Robert, I know you're extremely busy, and I want to thank you so much for coming on this podcast and speaking with us today. It was definitely an extraordinary conversation. I really loved it. I wish we had more time, but unfortunately, the podcast is only an hour long. So we got to kind of have to put it to a stop now. But thank you so much for sharing with us about your experience, your learnings, and giving our audience all this advice. I really appreciate it. I know, like I said before, you've given such a huge contribution to so many people. So I really appreciate you coming on the show and giving a contribution to our audience as well.
I love what you're doing, Daniel. It's been an absolute delight.